Anyway, all right, so ICMP is a protocol used to diagnose network problems. The main thing you do is send a ping and get a reply just to see that a server is there. And then you can use traceroute, where it sends a whole series of packets with low TTL of 1, 2, and 3, so it will only do 1 or 2 or 3 hops, and then it will die, and it will send an ICMP time exceeded packet back to you. So by collecting those, you can trace out the route. So TTL equals 1 bounces off here, TTL equals 2 bounces off that one, and by reassembling those, you can get a trace of the route that your packets are passing through. It's not normally of any importance. The only reason you do it is if you're in a company and you own these routers, and then you can try to figure out which one is not working. That's the main reason you would use it. All right. Technically, Unix and Cisco send UDP packets, but Microsoft sends ICMP packets. You could, in principle, send any kind of packet because the actual action happens at the IP layer. All right, so Telnet was used to send command line commands character by character to a server. It has no encryption and is therefore very unsafe and shouldn't be used anymore, but people do continue to use it. The more secure replacement is Secure Shell, which adds encryption to Telnet, making it much safer. FTP is similar. It sends data, everything unencrypted, including passwords, and it uses some strange pattern of ports, which is very confusing and hard to filter in firewalls, so a lot of firewalls have to be set in very promiscuous mode to allow FTP through, but nobody should be using FTP or Telnet anymore because they both send private information like passwords unencrypted. What you should use instead is a secure FTP that transmits your data over SSH. TFTP is used to upload firmware to things like IP phones and routers and such, and this is even simpler than FTP. It has no authentication at all, no password at all. It just loads data from a source and shouldn't really be used over the internet at all. It should be used over a private connection for a router or something. There have been malware that spread over TFTP back in the days of Windows 2000. Again, highly unsafe and really shouldn't be used on the internet. SSH is a secure replacement for Telnet, and there are some Unix commands, rlogin and rshell, that also made connections that were unencrypted, and there are secure versions of it, SFTP and SCP. This is secure file copy. This is another secure file copy protocol. All right, and you can use it as a secure tunnel for other protocols if you want to. Over TCP port 22, you can make a SSH tunnel, and then tunnel all your traffic through SSH to make a form of a VPN. The early version was old and vulnerable. Now everything should be SSH version 2. SMTP is used to send email, and POP is used to receive email if you have a local client like Outlook Express. It used to be, I'm not sure what people use anymore. I guess Thunderbird is the only local client anymore. And IMAP is similar. These things are not that common anymore. Most people leave their email on the server these days and use like Outlook Web Access or Gmail. DNS looks up IP addresses of servers from the alphabetical names like yahoo.com, using UDP-53 for the older stuff, and more modern ones use TCP-53 to move larger amounts of data. You can have a zone transfer where you get all the data from a server. There was a time when a lot of servers like Microsoft servers had zone transfers on by default, so people could download stuff that was not really intended to be public. That is not very common anymore. What is increasingly common is people use DNSSEC, which is a security extension for DNS, and if you use that, then the records have long cryptographic signatures on them, and that makes them bigger, so you have to use TCP instead of UDP. For some stupid reason, UDP can transmit 65 kilobytes of data, but DNS over UDP can only transmit a small amount, like 500 bytes, for no apparent reason. So you have to use TCP to move large files around, large answers. So the start of authority contains the master record for a zone. So if you own a domain like ccsf.edu, you set up a server, and that is the master DNS server, which is the original copy of all the data. And then you have, most people have recursive servers. Your router at home is a recursive server. It's a DNS server, but it doesn't have any data. So all it does is forward the requests onto other DNS servers. And you can have a caching server, which stores recently resolved names for a period of time just to make the network performance faster. DNS has a lot of weaknesses. It has no encryption, no authentication. It uses UDP. So the security, when you ask a DNS question from a router, the only way you can tell if you're getting the real answer or a fake answer is because there's a query ID and now a source port. The source port is randomized because of an attack that Dan Kaminsky was famous for from 2008. Now they randomize both of those, so that's 32 bits of randomness, and that makes it pretty secure. It's hard to guess both of those numbers. But if you could guess both numbers, you could poison a cache, and when Dan Kaminsky did it in 2008, nobody randomized the source port, so you only had to guess a 16-bit number, and that he could do. So he could poison caching servers and redirect traffic on the internet. So that was patched. DNSSEC was designed to patch that flaw, adding cryptographic signatures to records so you can know that they are authentic records that really come from an authoritative server. So this is very slowly being rolled out across the internet. It is a lot of bother to set up, and it doesn't really add much security because the simple patch here, where you just randomize the source port and the query ID, is in fact good enough for most purposes. So most people are just not motivated to really upgrade to DNSSEC. If you use an online dig source to get outside your local network, you can do queries in CDNSSEC. Men and Mice offer one. A lot of people do offer these things called DNS looking glasses. And so out here, you can get a DNSSEC response from like the Internet Engineering Task Force, and you'll see it has this long cryptographic signature for a resource record signature, which is the cryptographic signature to verify that this is an authentic reply. Most people are not using that system. All right, SNMP is used to control network devices like routers and firewalls and servers. And in the early version, it again sent passwords they called community strings without encryption. There is a new version that does add encryption, but many people have legacy devices on their network that still run SNMP version 2, and they continue to use the unencrypted insecure protocol. And in addition to it sending unencrypted, most of them are just at the default of public and private. So they actually have not only a unencrypted password, but a commonly well-known default password. So it's a very insecure protocol if you're using the old versions. HTTP delivers web pages over port 80 with no encryption, and it's very rarely used anymore. Almost everybody has upgraded to HTTPS, so everything is encrypted, and it runs on port 443 and is much safer. BootP is a very old protocol used to enable your BIOSes to boot from the network. I think this has pretty much been replaced by DHCP. DHCP is what is the replacement, and this is what happens when you boot up a modern machine. It sends a broadcast request asking for an IP address, and the router or DHCP server gives it an IP address, and that uses UDP 67 and 68. All right, so let's take a look at another Kahoot, which is 4D, which is here. Yeah, DNS Crypt is another security protocol that actually encrypts it at the client end and provides more security. DNS Crypt and DNS Curve are protocols to protect your confidentiality. Both of them have fallen into disfavor, and the one that's actually common is DOE, DNS over HTTPS. That's the one that seems to have won. All of these improve your privacy by not sending unencrypted traffic from your device. But they do not solve the cache poisoning attack, which is what DNSSEC does. So why most people are sort of baffled by DNSSEC. DNSSEC does not do anything that the end user would ever notice. It just means that the servers talk to other servers in a more secure way. But now a lot of people are using DOE, DNS over HTTPS. So the purists really hate that because it logically twists up the OSI model. Now you're moving layer 4 traffic over a layer 7 protocol, so it's logically messed up. But that's what people are using. If you think about it, you cannot use DOE, you cannot establish an HTTPS connection without first doing DNS lookup. So you cannot have 100% DOE DNS. You have to use insecure DNS to find the server. So that's why, the purists don't like it. But that's what people are using. It became popular in practice. The ultimate pizza. I'm suspecting that's the same person with the French fries. I don't know. That might be the cakes, though. Are those cakes? Yeah, I think they're cakes. Yeah. All right. Okay, more people coming. Good. Yeah, like shirt exchange, yeah. All right. All right. So what utility sends packets with different TTL values? Yep, that is traceroute. A different time to live to just find out what routers your traffic is passing through. H1 performs file transfers with no password. That's trivial file transfer protocol. All right, which one uses port 22? That's SSH. And which one uses RRSIG records? That's DNSSEC, Resource Record Signatures. All right. Ultimate Pizza, I think that's a person that doesn't care about the points. And XC, that's a previous winner. And Honey, good. All right. All right, I think we can do one more. So, all right, network architecture and design. So you got electromagnetic, missing an A. Electromagnetic interference is the radio that is emitted by one wire being received by another wire, causing crosstalk. And, oh, I see. Ultimate Pizza has told me who they are, so I'll make a note. All right. And so you don't want that. That's called crosstalk. That's one flaw. Attenuation is weakening as the resistance of the wire degrades the signal, so it gets weaker as you move from the source. Twisted pair cabling is the most common type. Unshielded twisted pair, you just have 4 pairs of cable, each twisted a different number of turns per inch in just a plastic sheath with no shielding. This is the most flexible, cheapest, and most common wire that's used. The twists provide some protection from crosstalk, because the signal from one wire tends to cancel out with the other wire, but it doesn't protect it from interference from the outside. Attenuation is a big deal. Yeah. All right. And so there's all these different labels, category 1, 2, 3. Most everything is now pretty much Cat 6. And they can go, you can have faster traffic if you have the higher category cable. 10 decibel drop per 100 feet. Yep, sounds right. All right, shielded twisted pair just adds a layer of shielding on the outside to protect it from electromagnetic interference, but that makes it more stiff and harder to bend and more expensive, so it's not that commonly used. The coax is what your cable TV uses. You have one conductor in the middle and a braided sheath on the outside, so it makes a nice geometric cylinder, and that has really good waveguide properties, so certain frequencies move very efficiently through it. Yes, and to of heart, very good point. People who are driving home after class, be careful. Only one student's here. I think he's taking the bus, and I'll be careful driving. Yes, it's a bad night to drive around. There's likely to be flooding and trees and power lines in the way and everything. Yep, definitely want to be careful. All right, so fiber optics is the highest bandwidth of all. It's glass. It is so thin that it's bendable, and it is little pulses of infrared light travel through the glass almost perfectly. So it can go very far, for example, 50 miles, without significant attenuation or dispersion. The electromagnetism outside the wire that moves the electrons. Well, yeah, you can argue that. I think technically electrons move through the surface of the wires. Anyway, so multimode fiber has wider core, so in fact there are many paths for the light to pass through, so the light tends to disperse. So it is less accurate, but it's cheaper to use because you can use cheap light-emitting diodes that will feed light into that wide core. Single-mode fiber has one very narrow core, like 6 microns across, or 9, and so you have to feed it with a laser, but then there's only one possible path for the light going through there, so it does not attenuate or spread hardly at all, and it's therefore much higher bandwidth and goes much further before you have to regenerate the signal. Wavelength division multiplexing sends multiple signals with different colors of infrared light, and that can easily go over 100 gigs, even much more over 100 gigs, and this is what all the undersea cables are that is carrying most of the intercontinental traffic, is wavelength division multiplexing in single-mode cables going under the sea. Yeah, and yep, so instead a TV cable network can reach 1.2 gigabits per second in the area. Yeah, that's very nice. Yeah, all right, good. All right, so Ethernet is the original one we're all mostly using. Originally it was coaxial cables, but now it's all using twisted pair and a physical star topology where there is one cable for every device, connected to a central device, which is a switch typically. It's baseband, so in principle, if two nodes transmit simultaneously, there can be a collision, but in practice that only matters if you're using hubs, which are pretty much extinct. Now everybody uses switches, so there are effectively no collisions. Although in principle there could be, in practice it's not a significant problem. So you had thin net and thick net was the early coaxial stuff that is completely extinct. I've never seen anybody use them. And now everybody uses 1000 base T or 100 base T with twisted pair cables. If you have a hub connecting them, then you have a problem of collisions, and so they use this system of detecting that two packets have collided because the voltage of those two packets added together, those two frames together, reaches a forbidden level, and then it sends a signal to a jamming signal to the devices and causes them to retransmit at a different time. So an Ethernet network connected by a hub cannot run at full speed. If it's supposed to run at 10 megabits per second, in practice, in a normal network, you can only get up to like 2 or 3 megabits per second before the collisions become significant and slow it down. So it was sort of a ripoff. You didn't really get the full speed. But if you use switches, which everybody does, then you don't have this problem. All right. However, in wireless networks, you still have this problem because in wireless networks, of course, there is no way to direct the physical transmission. So every device that transmits is transmitting to every other device, and they're all overlapping and the signals are all mixing together. And you can't detect a collision very easily either because the signal attenuates with 1 over r squared from the source, so you do not know what voltage it should reach. You don't know what a forbidden voltage is. So CSMA-CA is what wireless networks use, where before you send a packet, you have to say, everybody shut up, I'm about to talk. Then you wait, then you send it, then you say, okay, now you can talk. So you spend half of the entire available bandwidth arguing about who's going to talk next, and you avoid collisions that way. That's how wireless networks work. There are old networks that had different systems like Token Ring and ArcNet, which had a token that moved around the network and everybody would wait for the token, then you could attach data to the token which would carry it, so there was never any argument about who was going to talk next, and there was no problem of collisions, and it ran at full speed. If it told you it had 16 megs per second, you could really move data at 16 megs per second because there wasn't any disorganized chaos of packet collisions. But it's more expensive than Ethernet, and it's all pretty much extinct now. FDDI was another one, which used 2 fiber rings so that if there was a cut, you could send data the other way down the other ring, and you could survive a single cut and retain service, a form of fault tolerance. Again, a really old network that's, I think, not common anymore. All right. And so physical network topologies is the physical layout of the cables. You can have a bus network where this one goes to this one and that one goes to that one. And if you cut one cable, then a whole bunch of the network doesn't work anymore. This is the way early Ethernet was, and now it's the way you might have your your wider area network, like connecting different locations of your company set up this way, but you don't have LANs set up this way anymore. Hierarchical is what you often have from viewpoint of different locations, where you have a variety of connections. A main central device, like maybe your domain controller and various paths to it. There'd be a root of some sort. There's one way to do it. A ring is what Token Ring had, where you'd have data going around in a loop. This FIDI used a logical and physical ring. And a star is what Ethernet uses, where you have a central device, and every node has its own cable. So if you cut one cable, you only prevent one device from getting service. All right. I see a lot of good comments about more modern technologies, which is fine, but not needed for the CISSP exam. And so Token Ring actually was a physical star, but it was a logical ring. The cables actually looked like this, but the NICs were intelligent and the hub was intelligent, so it would actually move the data around, make a token go around here, a signal. Anyway, and then there's a mesh, which is what you have on a wide area network on, say, the internet, where you have a fully connected meshes where every possible connection is made. And on the internet, you have a partial mesh where there are several connections to each device, so there are several possible routes. So if any one cable gets cut, you can usually route around it, but there's some limit. If enough cables go down, then some portion of the network becomes isolated. All right. Let's try 4E. Ultimate Quesadilla. I know who that is. Or I think I know. Beer this time. Okay. All right. All right, if you put your cables near fluorescent light, what problem does it cause? Yep, they make electromagnetic interference. All right, what's the most common type of Ethernet cable? UTP, the cheapest and usually good enough. Which LAN uses 2 fiber rings? FIDI, all right. And what physical topology does Ethernet use? It's a star with a switch in the middle and every device having its own cable to connect to the switch. All right, COH, I know who that is. And that's Rouhani, good. And Billy, good. All right. All right, well, that's enough of the CISSP stuff for tonight. I'll stop the recording.